He didn't want to kill. He didn't want the fame. And he sure didn't want Hollywood making a movie about him. Sergeant York wasn't just a war hero biopic. It was a battle behind the camera, a film where the real soldier said no for 16 years. The studio offered him a fortune he refused. And one actor, he turned down the role 3 times before finally saying yes. These are 20 weird facts about Sergeant York. And the bonus, let's just say even the president used this movie as a weapon. Lock and load. This story hits harder than you think. Number 1. Gary Cooper didn't want to do it. When Warner Brothers first approached him about playing Alvin York, he read the script and passed immediately. Not once, not twice, but 3 separate times he turned down the role. Cooper was at the peak of his career in 1940, commanding huge salaries and picking only prestige projects. But a war movie about a religious pacifist who becomes a killing machine? He thought it was propaganda. He thought it was preachy. And he was convinced it would hurt his career at a time when America hadn't even entered World War II yet. The studio kept pushing. They offered more money. They promised creative control. They even had the director personally plead with Cooper. Nothing worked. Finally, they tried something different. They arranged for Cooper to meet the real Alvin York face to face. York was quiet, humble, and completely unlike the Hollywood version Cooper had imagined. They talked for hours, not about the war, but about faith, duty, and what it meant to do something you didn't believe in because your country needed you. Cooper saw something genuine, and after that meeting, he didn't just accept the role. He threw himself into it completely. What started as a hard rejection became the performance that would win him his first Academy Award. Number 2. Alvin York himself didn't want the movie made. For 16 years, Hollywood came knocking. Studios waved checks, producers made promises, directors pitched visions. And every single time, York said no. It wasn't modesty. It wasn't shyness. York genuinely believed that making money off his wartime actions would be profiting from the deaths of other men. He'd become a national hero after single-handedly capturing 132 German soldiers in World War I, but he never wanted the spotlight. He went back to Tennessee, married his sweetheart, and tried to live quietly. But the requests kept coming, and the money kept getting bigger. By 1940, York's small hometown school was falling apart. The building needed repairs, teachers needed salaries, and York had been trying to fund it himself for years. When Warner Brothers made their final offer, they didn't just talk about a movie. They structured the deal so that most of the money would go directly to the York Industrial Institute, the school he'd founded. It was a staggering sum for the time, reportedly around $50,000 plus a percentage of the profits. York still hesitated, but his wife Gracie convinced him. Not for the fame, not for Hollywood, but for the kids who needed a school. So after 16 years of saying no, Alvin York finally said yes. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. Number 3. The studio wanted a star, but York wanted control, and his first demand was non-negotiable. Gary Cooper or nobody. Warner Brothers had other ideas. They suggested Errol Flynn, James Cagney, even Henry Fonda. All huge names, all bankable, all available. But York refused every suggestion. He'd seen Cooper in a Western years earlier and decided if anyone was going to play him, it had to be that man. The problem? Cooper was under contract to Paramount, and Paramount didn't want to loan him out. Negotiations dragged on for months. Warner Brothers offered money, future considerations, package deals. Paramount held firm. Finally, Jack Warner himself stepped in and made a deal that was almost unheard of at the time. He agreed to loan out one of his own stars to Paramount in exchange for Cooper. It was a straight actor swap, a gentleman's agreement that could have fallen apart at any moment. But it didn't. Cooper was released for the picture, and York got his wish. What York understood, and what the studio initially didn't, was that Cooper's quiet, stoic presence was the only thing that could make the character believable. A flashy actor would have turned York into a caricature. Cooper turned him into a man. And that choice, that stubborn insistence from a Tennessee farmer who didn't even want to make a movie, ended up defining the entire film. Number 4. Howard Hawks didn't believe in the story. He was hired to direct Sergeant York, and he took the job because it paid well and the studio wanted him. But privately, he thought the whole thing was ridiculous. A pacifist sharpshooter who captures over 100 men in one day? It sounded like propaganda. Hawks was known for tough, cynical films. He didn't do inspirational, he didn't do patriotic, and he certainly didn't do religion. So when he sat down with the script, he started cutting. He stripped out the sentimentality. He removed some of the overt moralizing. And he told the writers to focus on the internal conflict, the man caught between his faith and his duty, rather than making it a simple heroic tale. The studio pushed back. They wanted a feel-good war picture. Hawks refused. He said if they wanted a propaganda film, they could hire someone else. Warner Brothers blinked first. They gave Hawks the freedom to reshape the story, and what he delivered wasn't what anyone expected. It was slower, quieter, more character-driven. The first half of the film barely mentions the war. It's all backwoods romance, religious struggle, and a man trying to figure out who he is. Hawks turned what could have been a recruitment poster into something deeper, something human, and ironically, by refusing to make it propaganda, he made it more powerful. Because when York finally picks up that rifle, you understand why it matters. Number 5. The transformation scene almost got cut. In the film, there's a moment where Alvin York sits alone on a mountaintop, wrestling with whether God wants him to kill. It's quiet, it's internal, and it takes nearly 5 minutes of screen time with almost no dialogue. The studio hated it. Test audiences were confused. Executives called it boring. They wanted action, drama, a clear turning point. Howard Hawks refused to budge. He argued that without that scene, the entire second half of the movie made no sense. If you don't see York genuinely struggle with his conscience, then his decision to fight just looks like patriotic duty. And that wasn't the point. The point was that this was the hardest choice York ever made, and it nearly broke him. Hawks shot the scene on location in the Sierra Nevada mountains, using natural light and minimal crew. Gary Cooper barely spoke. He just sat there, face to the sky, waiting for an answer that may or may not come. When the scene finally plays, there's no dramatic music, no revelation, no voice from heaven, just a man, a mountain, and silence. And somehow, it works. The studio eventually left it in, but they grumbled about it for months. Years later, that scene became one of the most studied moments in American cinema, because Hawks understood something the executives didn't. Sometimes the most powerful moment in a war film is the one where nobody fights. Number 6. They couldn't film the real battle. Alvin York's heroic actions took place in the Argonne Forest in France. But in 1941, Europe was a war zone again. There was no way to shoot on location, and even if they could, the actual battlefield had changed completely in the 20 years since World War I. So the production team had to recreate France and California. They scouted locations for months before finding a remote area near Calabasas that had the right terrain, thick forests, rolling hills, and enough space to build trenches. The art department went to work, constructing elaborate German bunkers, no man's land, and shell-cratered landscapes. They brought in military advisors to make sure the details were accurate. They studied photographs, interviewed veterans, and even consulted with York himself about what the battlefield had looked like. But there was one problem they couldn't solve. California didn't look like France. The trees were wrong. The light was too bright. The soil was too dry, so they cheated. They shot most of the battle scenes on overcast days or in early morning fog to diffuse the harsh sunlight. They imported different types of vegetation to fill in the backgrounds. And they used smoke machines to create a perpetual haze that masked the differences. When the film premiered, veterans who'd fought in the Argonne said it looked exactly right. Not because it was accurate, but because the filmmakers had captured the feeling of it. The confusion, the mud, the chaos. Sometimes, authenticity isn't about matching reality. It's about matching memory. 144, 147. Number 7. The turkey shoot scene was Gary Cooper's idea. In the script, there was a brief mention of Alvin York being a skilled marksman, a quick line of dialogue, maybe a target practice scene. But Cooper wanted to show it, not tell it. He convinced Howard Hawks to add a sequence where York participates in a turkey shooting competition, a real tradition in rural Tennessee at the time. The goal was simple: shoot the turkey's head from a distance while it's moving. Hawks loved the idea and built an entire scene around it. They brought in real turkeys, set up the contest, and gave Cooper actual rifles to work with. But there was a problem. Cooper had never been much of a marksman. He was an actor, not a soldier, and despite weeks of training, he couldn't consistently hit the targets, so they had to fake it. They used a combination of camera tricks, off-screen shooters, and carefully edited footage to make it look like Cooper was nailing every shot. In wide shots, you see the gunfire. In close-ups, you see Cooper's face reacting, but you almost never see both in the same frame. It's seamless editing, the kind of invisible movie magic that audiences never notice. And it worked. The scene became iconic, establishing York's abilities in a way that pure dialogue never could. Cooper may not have been able to shoot like York, but he sold the confidence of a man who knew he never missed. 139, 143. Number 8. Joan Leslie was only 16 years old when she was cast as Gracie Williams, Alvin York's wife. The studio knew it, York knew it, and they cast her anyway. In 1941, it wasn't uncommon for teenage actresses to play adult roles, but this was extreme. The character of Gracie was supposed to be a mature woman, someone York courted and married, someone who helped shape his moral compass. But Leslie looked like a high school student, because she basically was. Warner Brothers didn't care. They wanted someone young, fresh-faced, and wholesome, and Leslie fit the bill perfectly. The real Gracie York, who was still alive and very much involved in the production, was reportedly uncomfortable with how young Leslie looked. She visited the set once, met the actress, and politely said nothing. But privately, she told York that Hollywood had turned her into a child. The age gap between Cooper and Leslie was massive. He was 40 years old. She was 16. And even though the relationship in the film is completely innocent, it's impossible not to notice. To her credit, Leslie handled it professionally. She played Gracie with sweetness and sincerity, never overselling the romance, never trying to act older than she was. And somehow, it worked. Audiences didn't question it, critics didn't mention it, and the film became a massive hit. But looking back now, it's one of those Hollywood decisions that feels deeply strange. A reminder that the industry operated by very different rules. 150, 154. Number 9. The real Alvin York visited the set, and he hated what he saw. Not the actors, not the crew, not the production design. He hated how they were portraying him. York was a humble man who'd spent 2 decades trying to avoid the spotlight, and now he was watching Gary Cooper play him as a larger-than-life hero. In one scene, York watched them film the moment where his character single-handedly charges a machine gun nest. Cooper moved with confidence, precision, Hollywood bravery. York pulled Howard Hawks aside and said, "I wasn't brave. I was scared to death." Hawks listened, nodded, and kept filming the same way, because Hawks understood something York didn't. The truth doesn't always make for good cinema. What York remembered as fear and chaos and desperation had to be translated into something an audience could follow, something that felt heroic without being cartoonish. But York didn't see it that way. He saw a version of himself that didn't exist, and it bothered him for the rest of his life. He attended the premiere, smiled for the cameras, and gave interviews praising the film. But privately, he told friends that the man on screen wasn't him. It was someone Hollywood invented. And maybe that was the point, because Sergeant York wasn't really about Alvin York. It was about what America needed him to be. Number 10. The film's timing was no accident. Sergeant York premiered on the 2nd of July, 1941, exactly 5 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. At the time, America was deeply divided about entering World War II. Isolationists argued that Europe's problems weren't ours to solve. Interventionists said fascism had to be stopped. And caught in the middle was a country that remembered the horrors of World War I and didn't want to send another generation to die overseas. Warner Brothers knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't make Sergeant York as a historical drama. They made it as a weapon. The film's message was clear. Sometimes a pacifist has to pick up a gun. Sometimes a good man has to do terrible things. Sometimes duty requires sacrifice. It was propaganda, brilliantly disguised as a character study. President Franklin Roosevelt reportedly loved the film and encouraged its wide release. Military recruitment offices set up booths in theater lobbies. And when Pearl Harbor happened 5 months later, Sergeant York was re-released immediately. Suddenly, it wasn't just a war movie. It was a roadmap, a story that showed Americans, especially young men, that fighting wasn't about glory. It was about necessity. And whether or not that was the right message, it worked. Enlistment numbers spiked. The film became the highest-grossing picture of 1,941, and Gary Cooper's quiet, reluctant hero became the face of a nation heading back to war. Number 11. The battle scene took longer to film than the actual battle lasted. In real life, Alvin York's legendary assault on the German positions lasted roughly 2 hours from start to finish. The film's recreation took 6 weeks. Howard Hawks was obsessive about getting it right, demanding take after take, adjusting camera angles, repositioning extras, and reshooting entire sequences because a piece of equipment looked wrong or a soldier fell in a way that didn't feel authentic. They had over 300 extras dressed as German and American soldiers, and coordinating that many people through the chaos of simulated warfare was a logistical nightmare. Some days, they'd spend 8 hours setting up explosions, smoke effects, and gunfire, only to film 30 seconds of usable footage. Gary Cooper was exhausted. He'd trained for months to handle the weapons properly, but the physical demands of crawling through mud, running across open ground, and performing the same actions dozens of times wore him down. By the end of shooting, he'd lost 15 pounds and looked genuinely haggard, which actually worked for the character. The irony wasn't lost on the crew. They were spending weeks recreating something that York had done in an afternoon, and no matter how many explosions they set off or how much fake blood they used, they could never truly capture what it felt like to be there. Number 12. Warner Brothers wanted to cut the religious content entirely. In early drafts of the script, Alvin York's faith was barely mentioned, reduced to a single scene in a church. The studio was terrified of alienating audiences, worried that showing a man reading the Bible and talking about God would turn the film into a sermon. But the real Alvin York refused to approve any version that removed his Christianity. He told the studio flatly that his faith wasn't a side detail, it was the entire story. Without it, his transformation from pacifist to soldier made no sense. Jack Warner personally flew to Tennessee to negotiate with York, trying to convince him that modern audiences didn't want religion in their war films. York didn't budge. He said if they couldn't tell his story honestly, they couldn't tell it at all. Warner eventually backed down, but he insisted that the religious content be balanced with action and romance so audiences wouldn't feel preached at. The result was a strange compromise. The film kept York's faith front and center, but softened it enough that it played more like personal philosophy than organized religion. Church scenes were shot in warm, golden light. Bible readings were kept short, and York's spiritual crisis on the mountain was filmed more like a psychological breakdown than a religious experience. It satisfied both sides, barely. York got to keep his faith in the film. Warner got to keep his audience. And somehow, it worked. Number 13. The studio built an entire Tennessee town that nobody ever saw again. For the early scenes depicting York's home in Pall Mall, Tennessee, the production designers didn't just build a few facades. They constructed a complete functioning village, with a general store, a church, a blacksmith shop, and multiple houses, all built to period-accurate specifications using authentic materials from the 1,910 seconds. They erected the set on the Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank, and for weeks, it looked like a piece of rural Appalachia had been transported to California. Cast and crew marveled at the detail, the hand-carved wooden signs, the real dirt roads, the working water pump in the town square. Howard Hawks insisted on this level of authenticity because he wanted the actors to feel like they were actually in Tennessee, not on a soundstage. The investment paid off in the performances, especially in the quieter moments where characters simply existed in the space. But once filming wrapped, the entire town was demolished. Warner Brothers needed the backlot space for other productions, and keeping a Tennessee village standing served no purpose. Within days, it was gone, torn down and hauled away. No other film ever used it. No tours were given. It existed for exactly as long as the cameras needed it to exist, and then it vanished like it had never been there at all. Number 14. Gary Cooper learned to shoot like Alvin York, and then immediately forgot how. Before filming began, Cooper underwent intensive firearms training with military advisors and competitive shooters. They taught him York's specific techniques, the way he aimed, the speed of his draw, the unusual grip he used on the rifle. Cooper practiced for hours every day, shooting at targets until his shoulders ached and his fingers blistered. By the time cameras rolled, he could genuinely handle the weapons with the kind of casual confidence that York himself had possessed. But Cooper hated it. He hated guns, hated the noise, hated the smell of gunpowder. He was doing it purely for the performance, forcing himself through something he found deeply unpleasant. The moment filming wrapped, he never touched a rifle again. In interviews years later, Cooper admitted that playing York had given him nightmares, not because of the violence depicted in the film, but because he'd had to become comfortable with weapons he despised. He said holding a gun, even as an actor, made him think about what they were actually designed to do. And after spending months pretending to be a man who'd killed other men, even in service of his country, Cooper wanted nothing to do with any of it. Number 15. The German soldiers in the film were played by actual German refugees. Warner Brothers put out a casting call in Los Angeles for anyone who could speak German and handle military drill procedures. Dozens of men showed up, many of them Jews who'd fled Nazi Germany in the late 1932. They were writers, musicians, academics, people who'd lost everything when Hitler rose to power. And now they were being asked to put on German military uniforms and play the enemy. For some, it was cathartic, a way to reclaim some small piece of power by portraying the forces that had destroyed their lives. For others, it was deeply uncomfortable, triggering memories they'd tried to escape. The production treated them with unusual care, making sure they had private areas to change costumes and offering them the option to leave at any time without penalty. Some of the refugees formed friendships with the American actors, sharing stories about what was really happening in Europe while the cameras weren't rolling. Their presence added an unexpected weight to the battle scenes. These weren't just extras playing dress-up. They were men who understood what war actually meant, who'd lived through its consequences. And you can see it in their faces if you watch closely enough. Number 16. President Roosevelt used the film as a political tool before it even finished post-production. FDR's administration was desperately trying to shift public opinion toward supporting the war in Europe, but isolationist sentiment remained strong. When Roosevelt learned that Warner Brothers was making a film about America's most famous World War I hero, he personally contacted Jack Warner and asked for regular updates on the production. The president wanted to know the release date, the marketing strategy, even details about specific scenes. Some historians believe Roosevelt's team influenced the final edit, though Warner Brothers always denied it. What's undeniable is that the film's release was coordinated with a broader propaganda campaign. Roosevelt gave speeches referencing York's story. Government newsreels played before the film in many theaters. And when Sergeant York became a massive hit, the White House made sure everyone knew that this was the kind of courage America needed. York himself was uncomfortable with being turned into a political symbol. He'd agreed to the film to fund a school, not to promote a war. But by the time he realized how the film was being used, it was too late. Number 17. Joan Leslie never watched the film with an audience until 50 years later. After Sergeant York premiered in 1941, Leslie attended the Hollywood screening, smiled for photographs, and then quietly avoided ever seeing it again. She later admitted that watching herself as a teenager playing a married woman opposite a 40-year-old man made her deeply uncomfortable, even though nothing inappropriate had happened during filming. The age difference bothered her more as she got older, not less. She'd been thrilled to get the role at 16, seeing it as her big break in Hollywood. But decades later, looking back, she realized how strange the whole thing had been. In the 1,990 seconds, a revival theater in Los Angeles did a special screening of Sergeant York, and Leslie was invited to attend. She was in her 70s by then, and she finally agreed to watch it with a real audience. When the lights came up, she was crying. Not from nostalgia, but from realizing how much of her youth had been consumed by an industry that saw her as a product, not a person. She gave one interview after that screening and never spoke about the film publicly again. Number 18. The movie saved Gary Cooper's career, even though he didn't know it was dying. By 1940, Cooper had been a star for over a decade, but Hollywood was changing. Younger actors were taking over. Action films were replacing the quieter dramas Cooper specialized in, and behind the scenes, studio executives were quietly discussing whether Cooper's best days were behind him. He was still bankable, but barely. Then Sergeant York happened. Cooper's performance was raw, understated, and completely different from anything audiences had seen him do before. He wasn't playing the confident hero or the romantic lead. He was playing a man torn apart by impossible choices, and he did it without any of the theatrical tricks that other actors relied on. When the film became the biggest hit of 1,941, Cooper's status changed overnight. He wasn't a fading star anymore. He was a serious actor, someone who could carry complex material and deliver awards-worthy performances. The Academy agreed. giving him the Oscar for Best Actor. And just like that, Cooper's career was reborn. He'd go on to make some of his greatest films in the 1,950 seconds, but none of it would have happened if he hadn't finally said yes to a role he'd rejected 3 times. Number 19. The film was banned in several countries for being anti-German propaganda, which was exactly what it was. By late 1941, Sergeant York had become a cultural phenomenon in America, but internationally, it faced fierce opposition. Germany obviously banned it, so did Italy and Japan. But even some Allied countries were uncomfortable with how the film portrayed German soldiers as faceless enemies to be mowed down without hesitation. The British Board of Film Censors debated whether to allow it, worried that it might inflame anti-German sentiment in ways that could complicate delicate diplomatic situations. They eventually approved it with edits. France, still reeling from occupation, banned it entirely until after the war ended, fearing it would provoke reprisals against civilians. What's fascinating is that Warner Brothers never pretended otherwise. They knew they were making propaganda. They wanted to make propaganda. The goal was to prepare American audiences for war by showing them that fighting could be morally justified, even for a pacifist. When critics accused the film of being manipulative, studio executives didn't deny it. They just shrugged and pointed to the box office numbers. Sometimes art has a purpose beyond entertainment. Number 20. Alvin York died in 1964, and he never made another cent from the film. Despite Sergeant York earning millions at the box office and remaining popular for decades through re-releases and television broadcasts, York's contract only paid him for the initial release. There were no residuals, no ongoing royalties, no percentage of future profits. By the 1,950 seconds, the film had made Warner Brothers a fortune, but York was struggling financially. The school he'd built with the movie money was operating, but barely. He'd developed health problems and couldn't work, and Hollywood had completely forgotten about him. In 1961, York suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. Medical bills piled up, friends started a fund to help pay for his care. And through it all, Sergeant York played on television, earning money for everyone except the man whose life it depicted. When York died 3 years later, his family was left with almost nothing. Warner Brothers sent flowers to the funeral. They did not send a check. The film that had launched careers, won Oscars, and changed American history had given York exactly what he'd asked for originally, enough money to build a school. But Hollywood's promise of lasting gratitude? That died long before he did. Bonus fact. The rifle Gary Cooper carries through most of the film wasn't the same rifle Alvin York used in combat, but Warner Brothers marketed it like it was. York fought with a standard-issue M1917 Enfield rifle, a weapon chosen by the U.S. Army for its reliability and accuracy. But in 1941, that rifle looked old-fashioned and unimpressive on camera. So the prop department gave Cooper a modified Springfield M1903, a sleeker, more photogenic weapon that looked better in close-ups. They dressed it up with period-accurate details and weathered it to look battle-worn. Most audiences never noticed the difference. But military veterans and gun enthusiasts immediately spotted the switch, and some accused the film of historical inaccuracy. Warner Brothers responded with typical Hollywood logic. They released a statement saying the Springfield represented the spirit of York's actual rifle, which meant absolutely nothing but sounded official enough that the complaints faded. The real Alvin York's rifle, the actual weapon he carried through the Argonne Forest, was donated to a museum years earlier, where it still sits today, largely forgotten, while Cooper's fake version became the iconic image that generations remember.